I haven't actually said or written much since Donald Trump got elected as President of the United States, because I've been sitting reading all the comments and all the thoughts and pondering on them, and some are interesting, some are I don't agree with, some are just looking to blame someone when things have happened. But what's got me started today was reading about all those white supremacists who are complaining about a black Santa Claus in the Mall of America, because of course Santa Claus is white. Well, really, Santa Claus is everybody. Santa Claus is everywhere. Santa Claus is giving, happiness, loving people, and really it doesn't give a shit what your colour is. If you've got a kind heart and you love people and you're decent, generous and compassionate, then white, black, brown, speckled yellow with blue, purple spots doesn't really matter. It's what's in your heart. But I'm so sick of the self-pity of white supremacists and those who voted for Donald Trump and say that they did so because they're very angry about what's been happening to you. Yes, we're all angry about what's been happening in the world, with the billionaires making themselves wealthier and the poorer people getting poorer. But blaming others when you make a step that takes you into the morass of the bigotry and hatred that surrounds Donald Trump is really just self-indulgent. Suck it up, princes and princesses. You who voted for Donald Trump voted for a man who is, I mean, he hasn't changed since the election. He's a violent, angry man. He's a misogynist. He thinks it's okay to grab women by the pussy, and it's a bit of a joke. He thinks it's okay to mock a disabled reporter, and that really should have barred him from the election from the very beginning. He thinks it's okay to threaten to send immigrants back where they came from, and he has no idea what the actual situation is like. He has no empathy for people who've been fleeing injustice. And then he talks about building a wall to hold back Mexicans, which really is just appealing to people's fears and hatred and prejudice, and basically your own shadow side, the side you don't want to look at, the side where you are angry and you want to take it out on people who are less powerful than you, who might not be the right colour, but you're not game to take it out on people who have the power, the wealthy, the ones who've really been ripping people off. So as far as I'm concerned, I sat and thought about it, that I ought to be kind, I ought to be sensitive, I ought to understand people's problems. And I do understand people's anger, because I get angry myself. But I will not sit quietly when people will vote for a guy who is a fascist. And the reason I'm saying that is because I was born in the post-war era. I played on bomb sites where houses have been flattened, or I had no idea what a bomb site meant. But people died when those houses were flattened by German bombs. And I remember looking at a book that my parents had hid from me, but you know, kids find books everywhere, and seeing a picture of a Jewish man who'd had the Star of David engraved on his face. The flesh had been cut out completely, and he had the Star of David as a hole in his face. And I remember seeing the pictures of the concentration camps, the people laid out in rows, dead, bones. They were so thin that you couldn't even see that they'd been people. And what I see is that the people who jeered and mocked at Adolf Hitler's rallies are the same people who are filled with hatred and violence and aggro and racism, who you see standing there howling with glee at the anger and the hatred that Donald Trump preaches. So what I'm saying is that I'm not going to stand by very quietly while someone like Trump walks in Hitler's footsteps, because that is wrong. It is wrong to stay quiet. It is wrong not to say anything. If you are quiet when there is an oppression around, then you are on the side of the oppressors. And for me, if you voted for Donald Trump, you are on the side of the oppressors. You are gutless. And I want to wind up by saying also, in context of that, that I'm really heartened by the fact that I see so many good people step forward and are opposed to what Trump is doing, are appalled at his bigotry, are really unnerved by the fact that people could stand there and say that, oh yes, well, we need to give him time because perhaps he can change. He won't change. He's Donald Trump. He was Donald Trump and he remains Donald Trump. But in the process of bringing him out, of sort of lancing the sore, the pustule that he is, it's also galvanising people, good people, kind people, people who want to stand by their neighbours, who want to embrace those of colour, who are kind and generous and are absolutely appalled by what is happening, who step forward when people are being abused. Because that's the other thing that gets me about those who vote for Trump, or those who vote for, say, Pauline Hanson in Australia, who preaches hate and bigotry. When you back them, you're not the ones who suffer the abuse. You're not the ones who get shouted at in the street. You're not the black person who gets shot by the coppers and then the white person gets released because, you know, a black person's life is undervalued. No, you don't suffer from your bigotry. You put it out, but you don't actually have to put up with it. It's kids in school who get told by their other fellow students that they need to go back where they come from. You know, it's not you who suffer, and that's why in the end I decided that I really didn't feel terribly spiritual about the whole thing. I really didn't feel like I was going to say, I will pat you on the head and say, oh, you're doing so badly, darling. Yes, I can understand why you voted for Trump. I don't give a toss why you voted for Trump. If you voted for Trump, own it. But if you own it, then you have to say that you are a bigot, you're hypocritical, you don't like women, you don't like people of colour, you don't like anyone who is of a different religion of yours. In other words, you yourself, you're a bigot. So own it, suck it up, because I've had it with trying to justify people who look at Trump and say, thank you, Jesus, for giving me Trump. Because Jesus is someone who was kind to people. He fed the hungry. He hated those who ripped off the poor. He didn't judge people. And that's what we should be aspiring to. And that's what I actually see rising around the world now. People who are fed up with populism, who understand the dangers of it, and who are organising for people's movements everywhere. As, for example, the wonderful success of those at Standing Rock who brought an end to an illegal pipeline. That's where we should be going, folks. Standing with each other, loving each other, living in harmony. And screw anyone who voted for Trump, because, quite frankly, I've got no sympathy for you whatsoever.